and changes into practice, then it requires active input from and flexibility on the part of the RTT. And this is where, in the future, we need very much to develop. How do we contribute to this evidence-based practice? Because it underpins the roles that are specific to individual department requirements. So it can be very specific as to the situation that you are still working in. But it does require the technical application. And in the end of the day, the RTTs are the people who use these tools, who understand the limitations, who know why a certain plan simply will not work when you put the patient on the table and use the tools to treat them. The clinical care, how do we evolve in a time, say, when patients are receiving immunotherapy, which has a synergistic effect with radiation? How do we integrate that into how we care for our patients? And all of that points to researching into our own practice. What do we do with the technology, with the changes? How do we ensure that they are implemented in the best possible way? So again, it's demonstrating how key the RTTs are to the team and to actually achieving the optimum care of all our patients. So what will we be? What are our problems? And many of our problems, or the problems we identified as part of the train the trainers, when people came to us who really wanted to improve their knowledge and their understanding. And this was actually a quote that I got from Professor Abbasi in Pakistan, and he used it, and it's from Harry Truman. And the potential within you is greater than the obstacles around you. So we feel sometimes as RTTs that we're powerless, that we are at the bottom of the hierarchical chain in a department. We're a tiny group within our professional body. But we have to stop thinking that way, because that's a negative way to think. We can bring about change. We can bring about change because we really respect our profession and because we really want to do the best possible for our patients. And this great project will help to achieve that, because we will be looking for your input as to what are your problems, what do you need, how can we put in place what will help you. And then, okay, going back 100 years, going forward another 50, what has changed? Well, there is absolutely no doubt that the roles and responsibilities taken by RTTs across the globe have changed dramatically. But what hasn't changed is the professional recognition and the education. And that is the gap that we are trying to fill. That we are taking on very significant challenges in terms of the roles and the responsibilities we take every single day, but we are not being provided with the tools and the recognition that enables us to do that as well as we possibly can. And these are the issues that we actually identified, as I say, mainly from Train the Trainers, but also through ESTRO, through talking to people in general. The first thing that you have to decide in the future when you are deciding what you want to be is, do you really want to change? Do your colleagues want you to change? Because if you do, then you can really coalesce and come together to bring about that change. You have to see how it impacts on the other professionals in your department. If you take on or address new roles, new responsibilities, will they feel that threatened, say, by it? And as I say, particularly with artificial intelligence, all the professionals in radiotherapy are looking at where will they be in 20 years' time and how will they be working. So you need to be collaborating with them to see what will be all of your roles in a new environment. What is much more challenging and is probably more for governments, for the agency, for ESTRO to try to support is, do the educators of RTTs want to support changes? And that is a blockage we have found over and over again, that there are many reasons why they're not prepared to change what they do already. And the same is true for governments and professional societies. For many reasons, they're not really prepared to support the RTT change. And we have to try to see, how do we overcome those obstacles? And one thing that we're asking of you today and over the next while is to identify for us the barriers that you have in your country, in your department, so that we can really put together a solid block of what are the problems that results in this really bizarre recognition of the RTTs as professionals in their own right. I have to tell you, if you tell anyone outside of medicine that there are RTTs running linear accelerators who have never had any education in radiotherapy, they simply do not believe you, because it is so incredible to think that is the case. So, coming to a conclusion, I think the aim of this great project is to address the education variation globally and to try to ensure that, irrespective of your background, your title, whatever, that you receive radiotherapy specific education, both academic and clinical, that simply allows you to do your job as well as you possibly can, to contribute effectively to the team, and to offer the very best care and accurate treatment to your patients. So I think with that, I'm going to finish, and I am so looking forward to working with Michelle, Ed, Zubi, Ben on this project and with all of you. And I wish you all the best in your future as excellent RTTs. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mary. We might have time for one question here we received from Muhammad Adib from Malaysia. He described a problem here, a problem in Malaysia in which radiographers and radiation therapists are often confused as a single discipline. He asked what should be done in this situation. Thank you.
Well, this is one of the big problems, that either you are educated in this kind of global radiography world, of which radiotherapy is a very minor part, or you might be educated as a nurse where there's no radiotherapy at all. But it's the purpose of this whole project is to try to identify us as RTT professionals. And one thing you can do, which we did in Ireland and did quite successfully, is to approach your professional society and ask them to identify within that global radiography title that they use that RTTs are a separate body. And we now have the Irish Institute of Radiography and Radiation Therapists. And both have a committee, so both work on their own professional profile. Both work on providing CPD or education or verifying undergraduate education. And that has made a huge difference. And I think that's where you need to be, because you need RTTs representing RTTs. The problem with the global thing is we are always a very, very small percentage of the radiography body. I mean, maybe only 4 or 5%. If you're lucky, maybe 10. So you never get elected, you never get a voice. So the professional society has to recognize that you are an independent profession and address it in that kind of way. Because that will force also the education institutes to address the education gaps. And I'm not saying it's easy, it's extremely difficult, but I think between the agency and ESTRO, you have huge support in trying to achieve this. And the IAA has worked tirelessly to try to achieve this. So I hope I answered you. But,
Thank you very much, Mary. Moving on to the next item on our agenda, we will have Dr. Nicola Bizzocchi. I hope I pronounced this correctly. Nicola is an experienced senior medical dosimetrist with over 20 years of experience in this sector. After working for 12 years in the radiotherapy department at the Santa Maria Nuova Hospital in Reggio Emilia, Italy, where he specialized in various advanced radiotherapy techniques, he joined the proton therapy team at the Novel Proton Therapy Center in Trento, Italy. In 2017, Nicola moved to Switzerland, where he is currently a senior medical dosimetrist and head of treatment planning at the Paul Scherrer Institute, or PSI, Proton Therapy Center. Since 2017, Dr. Bizzocchi has been working as an adjunct professor of radiotherapy techniques at the University of Verona, Italy, and Cattolica University of Rome, Bolzano, also Italy. He has recently been appointed the position of adjunct assistant professor in the postgraduate MSc in advanced radiotherapy at the Dublin Trinity College, Ireland. He will share some updates on proton therapy, particularly how this will become a challenge for the RTT profession to address.
Okay.
Professor Bizzocchi?
Yeah, thank you so much for the introduction, Ben. I'm going to share the screen. Can you see the presentation?
Yes, we see the main PowerPoint presentation.
Okay.
Main PowerPoint
Good.
window, sorry.
So, as I said, thank you for the introduction. I'm going to speak about the role of the RTT in proton therapy. And for a better understanding of the RTT roles in the proton therapy department is useful to start introducing the proton therapy itself. And I will do that speaking about similarities and differences with the photon therapy world. And then I will speak about proton therapy technology, proton beam physics, advantages and disadvantages of proton therapy. I will speak about the topic, of course, of this presentation, and then educational paths in the end that you can take in order to have an education on proton therapy specifically. Similarities with photon therapy. So the conventional radiotherapy are that in part we use the same technology. That means CT scanners, software like Mosaic, ARIA, Eclipse, of course, Monaco, of course, adapted for proton therapy. And the same IGRT with the Combin CT and the same technology, usually advanced. And the same fractionation schemes are usually applied, and the conventional dose per fraction is as it is in photon in the conventional radiotherapy 2 gray, 1.8 2 gray per fraction. Also, the same professional figures are involved, plus the anesthetists that is important because usually proton therapy facilities treat a big deal of pediatric patients. So half of them, at least PSI, are under anesthesia. So this figure is an important one. But the other professionals are pretty much the same. And from a general point of view, a proton therapy department is pretty much similar to a conventional radiotherapy one. I mean, from the point of view of the organization in general. So workflow, procedures, and so on. Differences, well, we don't treat all the sites that are treated commonly in the conventional radiotherapy. For example, breast and prostate cancer are usually not treated with protons. And you very well know that are the most common treatment for photon therapy. But we treat specific cases for which the proton therapy is the gold standard. For example, CSI for pediatric patients, and base skull and sacrum chordomas and chondrosarcomas are usually treated with protons. Another peculiarity of a proton therapy department is that there is as an equipment in the equipment is the MRI. An MRI is present usually, so the RTT has to know how to run an MRI, and also that is not common in conventional radiotherapy. It is a dedicated equipment for the proton therapy facility, and also the couches used for proton therapy are usually different from the couches used for photons, because they are robotic couches with 6 degrees of movements, quite complicated. And the last but not the least point is that we use protons instead of photons, of course, and this is the most important one. It is important in order to understand the technology and also the physics, of course, but in a photon for a conventional radiotherapy, you know that we have to accelerate electrons in order to produce this high energy photons beam. And as a comparison, you see the dimension of the proton. The mass of a proton is 1,800 times bigger than a mass of an electron. So when you have to and you need to accelerate this particle to high speed energy, you need a technology that is huge and complex. And you see in this picture a cyclotron and a synchrotron. These are two different technologies for accelerating protons, and they need space, and they are expensive, very, very expensive. And then you have to drive the beam, the proton beam, to the gantry, the proton gantry, and you need a beam line, the so-called beam line. And this is also a complex machinery, complex devices, and you need room also for you need space, and of course you need money for this space. And this is an example of proton gantry, and you can see here, you can appreciate the dimension of these 3 men that are working with. So complex and an expensive technology, but however, nonetheless, the number of proton therapy centers is constantly increasing since the last 2 decades in a very dramatic way. And you see in this graph on the right hand, you have the number of total proton therapy facilities all around the world that were in 2010 roughly 30, and nowadays are more than 100. So they are more than triplicated in 10 years. And this projection is the same that we have for the next years. So why such an expensive technology is anyway increasing number of facilities all around the world? Well, the answer is in these 2 lines. So you see the PDD of photons here and the PDD of protons, the PDD with photons with the common, with well-known build-up, and you see the Bragg peak for protons. And what is important here to understand is that with protons, you can spare tissue that is proximal to the tumor, and you can spare completely every normal tissue and organ at risk, the normal tissue and organ at risk that are distal to the tumor. You can move this Bragg peak at will, because you change the energy and you move the Bragg peak at will. And this is the most important advantage of proton therapy beam. So the physics that is behind the protons is the one that allows us to increase the therapeutic ratio. And there is another point that is important, that protons, particles in general, are more effective, biologically speaking. So that means that with the same amount of energy, in gray, expressed in gray in radiotherapy, as you well know, you can you have a bigger damage of tumor cells. So you deliver the same energy and you damage the DNA more. And this can allow proton therapy to have this dose escalation thing that is useful in order to treat peculiar sites like, as I said, chordoma and chondrosarcoma. So this is an image that explains everything. You see on the left, a photon treatment, a very advanced one, a VUMAT treatment plan, and on the right, a single proton beam, and you see the conformity, the homogeneity is reached around the target. This is a CSI treatment, by the way, and you can spare immensely every normal tissue down to zero around the target. There are some disadvantages as well, but I want to speak about one briefly. There is no time to do that, but robustness is a big topic in proton therapy, and it is related to the sensitivity of protons to the density of matter. So protons are much more sensitive to the matter density than photons, and this creates a lot of issues in the proton therapy world. And this is why you maybe will hear about robustness a lot in the proton therapy environment, because we need to be robust, more robust. We need to be careful with positioning even more than in the photon therapy environment. And also about planning, you need to be careful. The positioning of every beam has to be studied carefully together with planners and medical physicists before delivering a treatment. So I will speak now about the three main roles that an RTT can cover in a proton therapy department. The frontline RTT, I like to call it. I like to call this role in this way because I really appreciate the fact that this is the conventional RTT role, right? The RTT that deals with patients, and I am a planner, and I really appreciate, and I really regard this role as fundamental because it's about taking care about the patient, not only treat the patient, and this is amazing. So we have also the planner RTT role and the care path manager RTT. So for the frontline RTT, as I said, this professional has to deal with an MRI. I don't want to say daily, but more or less daily, yes, at least 2-3 times per week. And also with this kind of couch, it is a robotic one with 6 degrees of movement. And setup and positioning is done also for pediatrics, and this is really important when you think about taking care about patients. Pediatric patients are really peculiar because, as I said, most of them are treated under anesthesia, so you need a complex positioning and a complex setup. I like very much this picture because there are 5 professionals involved here. There are 2 RTTs, 1 nurse, 1 anesthetist, and a medical doctor. And they have to work in team in order to ensure that the setup is properly done, because the patient needs to breathe properly during the treatment. And you see, this is a setup inside the gantry room. It's quite complex. And PSI, we treat at least 3-4 patients under anesthesia every day. So you can really understand that is a different modality and task that from conventional radiotherapy. And then planner RTT. It's quite common to have planners or dosimetrists in proton therapy facility. This is not a common role in Europe, especially in conventional radiotherapy facilities. I know that planners are not really common, but because proton therapy maybe comes from the US as a technology, and in the US there is this profession that is recognized as a medical dosimetrist. So this is probably why in proton therapy facilities, also in Europe, we have this role quite commonly used. And well, you know, planners. I am a planner as well, so we need to work with software. So they are really complex nowadays. AI also is applied, machine learning with this software. So it's more an IT competence that you need. But it's very interesting and very exciting, in my opinion, this role. And we have to discuss with the physician a lot about our job constantly, in a constant way. And then there is this care path manager, RTT. This is a raising role in, I think, everywhere, especially in the US, but also in radiotherapy departments in Europe, not only for proton therapy departments, but anyway, in proton therapy departments, there are RTTs that deal with the care path, and they are kind of manager of the workflow. And this is complex, really complex, especially because in proton therapy, we have a lot of replanning because of robustness. We replan a lot patients, so the care path is complex, and there is this need of someone taking care of it, and RTTs are usually applied for this role. And this is the last slide of my presentation, so I would like to speak about educational paths that you can take for have a deeper knowledge of proton therapy. And of course, I want to speak about this postgraduate diploma that Michelle and Mary have already spoken about, and in which I teach together with them, and at the Trinity College, but also about this University of Vienna Neustadt in Austria. There is a master this is a master 2 years long. It is in functional imaging and conventional and ion radiotherapy. It's online, so it's very interesting. I did it, and it's very exciting. This program also for people that want to increase and have a higher degree. And there is also this course, this third one that is online as well from US. You can find them online, of course. It's enough that you digit. I didn't put the link, but you can find them easily. And also this course is for RTTs, specific for RTTs, and is about proton therapy. And then there are other two courses. These are 1 week course. There is the PSI Winter School, but it's more tailored. It's for a broader audience, especially for MDs and medical physicists. And also this Astro course in particle therapy is interesting. They are both 1 week long, and yeah, maybe for a shorter courses you can also apply for these two ones. And of course there are others. You cannot list all of them, but not many anyway. And this was my last slide, and I thank you for your attention. I'm gonna stop sharing.
Thank you very much, Nicola. As we can see here, it's a challenge that sees a wide gap between what is needed and what is available. And this is something that all of us as the radiotherapy community will need to think about, especially considering rapid adoption of this technique in a lot of countries where the role of RTTs have not been established. To the attendees, we will not have time to discuss questions directly in this for this talk, but please send the questions through the Q&A panel, and we will assign this to Nicola for the answers. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Ben.
We will move to the next item in our agenda. For this, we will have Dr. Michelle Leach, who will share with us the status of education and training of RTTs globally. A brief introduction. Dr. Michelle Leach is a radiation therapist and associate professor in the discipline of radiation therapy at Trinity. She holds a BSc, MSc, and PhD in radiation therapy, as well as postgraduate diplomas in statistics and clinical health sciences education. She is the course director of the BSc program at Trinity College and currently chair of blended learning at ASTRO. She is the editor-in-chief of the ASTRO Journal for Technical Innovations and Patient Support in Radiation Oncology, or TIPS-RO. And she is also an editorial board member of Radiotherapy and Oncology. So it's a great pleasure to introduce Michelle. And Michelle, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ben. I just got back in time. I'm afraid we have some thunder here at the moment. I had a power cut, so apologies for that. So I'll just start sharing my screen again. So I just check that you can see that okay, Ben?
Yes, it's perfect.
It's perfect. Okay, great. Okay, so thank you very much. So I suppose taking up a little bit from where Mary's left off earlier, I'm going to speak now a little bit about the current status of RTT education. And I really like this analysis of any RTT role, because I think it applies to RTTs anywhere in the world, whether you are working in an environment where technology is extremely limited, or whether you're at you're fortunate enough to be in a country where proton therapy, as Nicola just spoke to, is available. But really, as RTTs, we have to have knowledge, skills, attitude, and this critical awareness to try and challenge, change, and modify, so that we're in a position to respond to all developments, no matter what those developments are, because the developments are going to be very different from one region of the world to the next. That goes without saying. But we should be able to offer optimum treatment within our own context to the patient, and to participate in and enhance the performance of the multidisciplinary team, no matter where we are and no matter what our situation is. So when an RTT comes to work in your department, what should they be able to do? And the first thing that they should be able to do is distinguish between what's good and what's bad practice. And I know that sounds very basic, but actually that's fundamental to a lot of the issues that we see with RTT education in different regions of the world. If someone has not been educated to understand what is the difference between what is good practice and what is bad practice, then they're not in a position to basically kind of break the chain, if you like, of practice that may not be optimal and kind of keeps going or perpetuates year in, year out. So being able to distinguish between good and bad practice is really, really important. And also accepting only the best possible practice for where you are working, and with the equipment and the facilities and the, I suppose, logistics that are open to you. Accepting only what is best under our circumstances. And also the RTT should be able to meet challenges and adapt to changes. And I mean, I think as Mary spoke to earlier, I mean, we have just shown as RTTs in the past 18 months how well that we are able to do that, how well that we are able to meet new challenges and adapt to changes in our environment. So if you have a sound education at undergraduate level, and that sound education is going to be, probably a little bit different from one region of the world to the next, okay, as in what is taught, then you can be seen as equal members of the multidisciplinary team, okay, and that sounds straightforward, but in many countries this is still kind of an aspiration, and RTTs are not what we would say educated with the underlying kind of scientific and technical principles of radiation therapy, but rather they are just trained. So they carry out instructions maybe by others who may also not be educated to a high standard. So we know that we already have international RTT or radiation therapy curricula. So they already exist. And obviously the one that I'll speak to today is the IAEA book for radiation therapy education. So of course we expected there's going to be some kind of a stumbling block in bringing that to fruition in the clinic. But why are these so difficult to navigate? Why is it so hard to actually apply these curricula? And that's because, of course, that we only see the tip of the iceberg, but really what's underneath is very, very complex in different regions of the world. And the first one that I'm going to speak to here are the massive variations in scope of and standard of practice. So, of course, if we look at these two scenarios, and today we have participants from 111 different countries in the world. So we have people who are working under very, very different circumstances. So, of course, if you're working on older equipment, maybe cobalt units, for example, your scope of practice is going to be very different from an RTT who's working on, a top of the range linear accelerator. But the one thing that I think is extremely important to get across to you is that your scope may be different, but you can still treat to the best of your ability within that scope. And in fact, because you don't have all the bells and whistles of the nice linear accelerator available to you, your scope is nearly more important, I would say. So we have this massive difference in scope. So a unified curriculum becomes quite difficult, needless to say. And then we also have the issue about level of autonomy of RTTs in different regions of the world. So in some regions, RTTs have, kind of poorly defined roles and responsibilities within the departmental structure. They might have difficult or hierarchical relationships with other members of the radiation oncology team. And I know that there's many RTTs today who have joined who probably feel that, RTT a little bit of the bottom of the food chain within their organization. And if that is the case, then the level of accountability for RTT actions is very variable. If you're not considered, a very important member of the radiation oncology team, well, then maybe your accountability is different from one department to another. So it's very, very complex. And then the next point I'd like to speak to are the RTT curricula and completely unaligned curricula. And if we take somewhere, as we're talking globally today, but if we take somewhere even as a region as small as Europe, we see this very, very frequently. So we have the handbook for the education of radiation therapists from the IAEA. It exists, it's a very useful document. If you don't have it or you need to get to it, the easiest way is to Google Human Health Campus and go to radiation technology, and it's right there. And you can have a copy of it. And it clearly lays out what an education program for RTTs should contain. And it speaks to the clinical education component. And I think it's very important not only that the clinical education is radiation therapy specific, but that it's also recognised that the clinical education component is more than skills training. And what I mean by that is it's not just observing, it's not just copying what you're seeing the whole time. It's actually having the technical and scientific understanding and basis to question what is being done, to think, are there better ways of doing it? To look things up and see, could we do this in a better way for our patients? So it goes that level above skills training, and that's how we make a change, and that's how we break that link of perpetuating or continuing on the same. Sorry, my slides are leaping about place. In the past. And that goes for everywhere in the world, every region of the world, because we need to actually understand what it is we're doing, not just copying what we're doing. And only in that way, when we have those skills, can we actually become reflective practitioners. And then answered it, I think, already, and I mentioned it again a little bit. The little or no political buy-in, and sometimes for valid reasons and sometimes not. Of course, the resistance to change. So in countries, the profession doesn't exist. And Mary already mentioned that we've 28 titles within Europe alone for our profession. And it's not that we think that every individual country needs to go their title, because that's not feasible for a lot of legal reasons, but that we can come together under an umbrella term is actually extremely important. And the term that's recognised by the IAEA is refer to it as RTT. And it doesn't mean you have to change a title in your country, but it is important that it's an internationally recognised acronym or an internationally recognized title. The reason for that is that sometimes when countries approach their ministries of health and education and basically say, you know, we need to do something about the education of this profession in our country, a curriculum like this one, you know, they often are met with resistance saying, but we don't have that profession in this country. And there's a major stumbling block, okay? So that's in countries where, for example, there are not competing priorities politically. So, I mean, I'm very cognizant or aware of the fact that there are people joining from countries today where cancer may be, you know, quite low on the list of societal priorities. You know, where other diseases may be more prevalent or take up more resources, like malaria, for example, or where there are, you know, a significant food poverty in a country. And of course, that's completely understandable. But what I just described to you about the title, we see that in countries where those issues, those societal issues are not prevalent. So we have this stumbling block at this point in time. And as we said, there's also can be departmental structure and hierarchical issues. As Mary spoke to earlier, do we want to change? Do we want to make a difference? And I'm aware that there's quite a lot of radiation oncologists and medical physicists joining today as well. And what I would say to you is help your RTT colleagues. If you want better quality treatment in your country and in your department, everyone has to work together. That's extraordinarily important. No one of us is more important than the other when it comes to managing patients. And our only focus should be on providing the best quality treatment for our patients. And we can't do that if we're not all educated to a reasonable standard. So I'd urge the medical physicists and radiation oncologists here today to recognize this and recognize if there is an issue with RTT education in your country, to come and work with us on this project. And of course, I'm sure there's many others. Again, that's probably the tip of the iceberg. And that's where in the GREAT project, we'll need your input to tell us, this is the situation in my country, because, you know, you're the experts in what happens in your own country, not us. So where to next? What can we do, or what can you start with? So the GREAT project I mentioned already, and I'll come back to that in the next section that Ben is going to introduce in a few minutes. But I think, you know, it's important and incumbent upon all of us to sometimes take a long, hard look at where the education, or our education programs for RTTs are at present. And as part of this project, Mary and I will be writing a benchmarking document specific for the IAEA handbook. But at the moment, we do have a European one, and I'm not saying it's going to be applicable in every context. It certainly is not. But there is a European one that exists, and I have the URL there, and I'll put it into the Q&A again after this presentation. And it's a good document just to have a look at, to give you an idea about taking a look at your own curricula in your country and seeing what are the gaps. Because we all have gaps, you know, I mean, absolutely every single country, without fail, every year, even on our own undergraduate program, we have a curriculum review every year because we have gaps, and we have to see how we're going to address those gaps. So I think there's no shame, there's no embarrassment in looking at your curriculum and actually saying, yes, we have gaps, and how are we going to address these? Because we all do it. And I think we have to do that if we want to move forward in the profession. So that's a useful starting point, for sure. And then our role. So where are we? This is where we kind of currently are. So how are we going to move beyond this? And I think the first thing that we have to think about are that the whole, I suppose, ethos of this project and of our collaboration today is putting patients first. So patients are front and center of this project. And I think if we can all agree that patients deserve the best quality treatment that we can give within our context, it's going to be different, obviously, from country to country. Nicola has just spoken about proton therapy. For example, we don't have that in Ireland, and we probably never will be because of our population size. But so we can't have complete equity across the world. But what we can agree on is that patients within our own context deserve the highest quality treatment that we can give them. Second is that we need to recognise that RTTs are a professional in their own right. And our colleague from Malaysia already mentioned that in one of her questions. We are not, I suppose, dabbling in a little bit of this, a little bit of that on different days of the week. We're a specific profession who are treating cancer patients, and that's a massive responsibility. And we need to be recognised as professionals who do that. Third, then, of course, is fundamental to this project, which is the education. So accept that RTT-specific education is required for this specialty. This is not a specialty where one size fits all. We need a certain amount of RTT-specific education. That is not to say that, it's appropriate to, push a 3 or 4 year degree program specifically in radiation therapy in every region of the world. That's not appropriate. But what is appropriate is that there is a certain amount of RTT specific education so that people can be competent practitioners. And then finally, because I'm aware that there are people also joined today from different countries where the baseline education is already dealt with. And for those of us who are at that level, I suppose, we too have issues in terms of moving on up and advancing the profession to the next level. I think that's probably a webinar for another day. So with that, I'll say thank you and hand back to Ben again.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Can we have the opportunity to address one recurring question from the audience? I noticed 2 or 3 questions related to availability of any unified international recommendations for higher level educations for RTTs.
Yeah, so there's no,
or EU. Thank you.
Yeah, so there's not. So I suppose radiation therapy and radiation oncology is an interesting specialty in that typically there are kind of legislation for individual countries. Okay, so we even see this in Europe, that we kind of aspirationally, I would say, can technically move from one country to another within Europe to work as RTTs. So that's technically how it appears on paper, but that's not the reality. Okay, so the reality is that typically within each country there's kind of a benchmark standard or legislation that has to be met. So I suppose the easiest example I can give you is the Irish one, because of course that's where I am. So we have a certain benchmark of what are called standards of proficiency that anyone who wants to work in Ireland has to meet. Okay, so our own program has to meet these standards, and anyone who hasn't taken our program who is from outside also has to meet these standards. And that makes it very, very difficult for free movement of people, even around Europe, let alone internationally. So there is no international or EU document that says, here's a degree in radiation therapy, now you can work anywhere in the world. That doesn't exist. But what I think is important is that, we address the individual needs of each country and put in the RTT specific education that is required for that context. That I think is important. But I know that a lot of people, are obviously very interested in working in different regions of the world. And I often get asked that question, but there are very, specific legal constraints on working in one country and another. So therefore, there are no kind of international recommendations on how you can do that.
Thank you very much, Michelle. For the next item on our agenda, we will be joined by 2 other experts. First, I would like to introduce Dr. Eduardo Zubizarreta, is our current head of Applied Radiation Biology and Radiotherapy section at the IEA. He has contributed to a large number of agency publications and has been involved in organization of quality audits, which we call Quattro missions, and also expert missions, technical meetings, and training activities all over the world. He has been involved in a large number of radiotherapy projects worldwide and provided technical advice in 7 research studies as principal investigator. Also, we will have Dr. Eduardo Rosenblatt. Dr. Rosenblatt is the former head of the Applied Radiation Oncology and Radiotherapy section of the IAEA. He is a clinical oncologist who has worked for 11 years for the agency. And during these many years, he has managed a large number of education and training initiatives for radiotherapy health professionals, including RTTs. And among all these initiatives, we will hear more about a particular project which was done in Europe and have generated a large number of lessons learned and opportunities in that region. So first to start, I would like to invite Dr. Zubi Zareta to share some some perspectives on the importance of collaboration for the RTTs and how this has been part of deliverables and IEA's activities. Please, Zubi.
Thank you very much, Ben. I will begin to share my screen. Okay, here we are. I like this picture very much because it's a happy picture of the radiotherapy department where we can see a relaxed feeling of the RTTs there. And I have to talk about the collaboration between Trinity College and the IAEA. As I said before, this is, on one hand, the culmination of a long collaboration that we have had with, particularly with Mary Coffey and Michelle Leach for 2 decades, but it's a continuation, no? So we are not beginning here, no? We are continuing our collaboration in a more formal way, which is always very nice. And this webinar is to tell you that we have reached this particular status. And if we go back to 2005, this is the first syllabus for the education and training of RTTs. That was also the first of our collection of syllabi for different professionals in radiotherapy. It was translated to many IAEA, UN languages, and Mary Coffey was one of the drafters of this, I would say the main drafter of this publication, which was very nice and was very practical. And at that time, it was more looking at the training of RTTs in a shorter period at the radiotherapy department. This is, on the right hand side, we can see the new handbook of education of radiation therapies that they already showed. And the editor of this second edition was Eduardo Rosenblatt, and also Michelle and Mary were collaborating in this second edition. And then we come to another project that Mary, Michelle, and Eduardo will comment with more detail, which was a Train the Trainers project that was a joint project between the agency and Estro. So a team of RTTs from different countries came to Vienna, and they were trained mostly on the ability of organizing their own activities and the life of the society of RTTs. And here we can see a special edition of tips where they review the project in the first 10 editions. There was an additional edition in 2019, and this year there is another one. And here we have the editorial written by Mary and Eduardo asking the question, this is a little bit provocative, is education of RTTs really unnecessary? This is a picture or an example of the Train the Trainers edition of 2013. Most of them are coming from post-Soviet countries. So they are, many of them are Russian-speaking countries. Here we can see Mary, hiding there, Viviane from Estro, Eduardo, Ivan de Velde from Belgium, and Elena Fiderova, and the teams from different Eastern European countries. This is another example. Israel wanted to bring many teams, more teams that we could accommodate the Train the Trainers program. So we decided to go to Israel. And here we can see Mary and Michelle, Ivan de Velde there, people from friends from the Ministry of Health of Israel. Here I am. And this was the first opportunity in which RTTs from Israel went out from their radiotherapy departments and could meet other RTTs from other hospitals. So it was a very interesting experience, and these two RTTs are from a Palestinian hospital. All the staff is Palestinian, and they only treat the Palestinian patients in Jerusalem. It's the Augusta Victoria Hospital. And you can see that even in what could be theoretically difficult political situations, everything can go very well. Another example is Icaro 3 that took place in February. We had more than 300 participants and 3,000 observers from 142 member states, 142 presentations from 140 speakers, 10 refresher courses, and 3 e-contouring workshops. This was a virtual conference. And here we can see that one of the keynote lectures is about the RTT profession, was given by Mary Coffey, and that one of the refresher courses on educational milestone in the profession of RTTs was chaired by Michelle Leach, and that there was another activity related to radiation oncology education in the interconnected world that was chaired by Sandra Turner and Jesper Eriksen, but Michelle Leach is also there. And in most of these activities, we also need to acknowledge that PRAJOGI, who is organizing this webinar, was behind the scenes organizing all these virtual activities. So with that, I would like to say that collaboration is very important, and these examples of collaboration between us and the Trinity College are just an example, but the important thing is the collaboration on your daily life, no? The opportunity to share your experiences, to be part of a national or regional or international society, to learn from others, and to give your experience and knowledge also to others. So collaboration in the daily life, I think, is very important. We are always learning, and the one who stays at home and doesn't want to have contact with the outside world will not learn anything. Back to you, Ben. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Zubi. I have a question for Dr. Ed Rosenblatt. Ed, you have heard that Zubi mentioned the Train of Trainers program called the Astro IEA Best Practices in Radiation Oncology. And in my personal view, and I'm sure that everyone here will also agree, this project has made a significant impact on the development of the RTT profession, particularly in Europe. But we have not seen similar success elsewhere. So you can see there is a big difference here between regions of the world. And as someone who was behind the conception of this project, could you share with us how this project come into existence and how did it develop over time? Sorry, Ed, I think we lost your connection. I'll switch your video off for now.
But now, okay, I think it's okay. Please confirm. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Ben?
Yes, Ed,
Yes, we can hear.
All right, so thank you. Nate, this the official launch of the project with very there were significant countries. New model of extra course proposed and discussed within the Estro Education Training Committee.
Sorry, excuse me, Ed. Your voice broke off.
Perhaps, Ben, maybe we could move to the next to Mary and see if Ed could rejoin. That might be an option.
Yeah.
The same ground, really. So I'm happy to do that if that's easier.
Okay, let's do that. Sorry, Ed. We will return to you later. I will pass the same question to Mary at the moment. You are also behind this project. To what extent do you think the project has been able to meet its goals, and what are the most important lessons learned which we can bring forward?
Hello, Ben.
I have.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Ed.
Yeah, I go on then.
Okay, please.
Okay, I go on. As I was saying, the establishment of the best practice in radiation oncology was planned in 2007, June 2007, and actually started as a joint project with the IAEA in 2008. Now, to consolidate the collaboration between both organizations, then president of the ESTRO Education and Training Committee, Professor Richard Potter, and Mary as course director, agreed to appoint me in my
I think we have some technical difficulties there.
addition by faculty of the course.
Sorry, Ed, we lost you again. I think we...
And also as
I will move to Mary for now.
Okay, I have some slides, so I'll just share them with you because I think they outline it, okay? So the Train the Trainers project now, if I can start the slideshow, would be great. Was an initiative taken initially by ESTRO and then linking directly with the IAEA. And the idea was that because it was so difficult to get the education institutes to change the way they addressed education, we decided to look at, well, could we help the RTTs on the ground to actually begin to develop education programs themselves? So that was how it started, with this project to train trainers. And we agreed that it's very difficult to develop an education program all on your own. So we looked for teams of 3 so that they would be able to support each other. And it runs as a 2-year cycle. And the first week is where we actually work with the groups. No, we don't lecture to them at all, and that's very difficult for them on the first day when they come. But we work with them over a week to put a structure of a short course together on a topic that is really important for their RTTs. And we get them to consider the actual content, the practical aspects, all of the issues that are related to actually preparing a course. And then over the next 2 years, they have to prepare and deliver 3 short courses. And we had a policy that one of the faculty would attend the first course to give a bit of support, not to give lectures, but to see how it went, to learn, to see who educated on the course, who the faculty were, that sort of thing. And at the end of the first year, the group come back and discuss what was positive, what was negative, what they achieved, and how they then would move forward. Because our ultimate aim was to influence the education-specific content of the national programs to increase the radiotherapy component. So that's exactly what we were doing, was addressing the lack, supporting the RTT colleagues to do what their education centres were actually failing to do, and then to see could they integrate their short courses into the existing national programmes. So as you can see, we had a very large number of countries who have participated over the years. And as Zubi explained earlier, we also had an entirely separate programme for Israel. Now, not everything was successful because you couldn't expect everything to be successful. But the success, I must be fair, was way beyond what our expectations would have been at the time. And this is where we are currently. And approximately, and I think that number has gone up, 60 short courses have been developed and delivered by RTTs in their own language, in their own country, to all of their colleagues, and also to some of the radiation oncologists and the medical physicists. And in doing that, they have demonstrated an ability to take responsibility for their own educational needs. And they've gained the respect of their professional colleagues who were a bit reluctant in the beginning, but have really come behind them. And secondary to that, which was really important, at least 3 countries have now identified the need and set up their own national RTT societies. So this was a comment that came up earlier from somebody from Malaysia. This was what these RTTs did on their own. They actually established their own societies to represent their needs. And then Michelle developed the RTT Alliance, where these societies can join ESTRO at a vastly reduced cost and get the benefits of ESTRO, which is huge for their professional colleagues in the country. There are 2 dedicated MSc programs that have been developed by groups who were on the Train the Trainers program. There are 2 specialist add-on programs in radiotherapy where maybe they couldn't go as far as actually MSc programs. They've managed to influence the education institutes to improve the radiotherapy component in some of their courses. RTTs have been appointed onto the faculty of a couple of education programs. We now, from the Train the Trainers specifically, we have RTTs who attended following MSc and PhD programs, both nationally and internationally. There's a very strong participation in the ESTRO committees, in the National Societies Days and annual conferences. So all of this is feeding into the actual knowledge and background of RTTs that they can bring back to their own colleagues and improve the education of all of their colleagues in that kind of way. There are integrated faculties in national conferences. So you have what would have been exclusively a radiation oncology conference, for instance, that I was at recently in Croatia, that now has a full RTT component integrated into it. So these are the kind of developments that the Train the Trainer project has brought about. And then one which I think is really exciting and so amazing is the development of this Southeast Europe Technology and Radiation Oncology Initiative. And that is all of these countries listed here, who all were members of the Train the Trainers, have come together and they run a joint biannual conference that takes place in one or other of their countries every 2nd year. And it is amazing. You have RTTs doing all the work, making all the presentations. They may have invited speakers from other professional disciplines, but they have set this up and they run it themselves. And it is probably the most exciting outcome from the Train the Trainers project. And as Zubi said, we'll be starting on another cycle now in September. Unfortunately, because of the technical cooperation structure of the agency, we've only been able to offer it in Europe, but I'm sure there are ways to overcome that. Maybe, I'm not sure, but it has been a really wonderful project to be involved with, and I think it addressed the needs of the RTTs. It gave them a voice, it gave them respect for themselves, it improved their self-confidence, and they achieved way beyond what we would have expected. So I think despite a couple of failures, I think overall we would feel that it was a very successful project. And I hope it will continue to be so into the future. So I think part of the aim of this great project will continue to address that education and ensure that the RTTs receive this specific radiotherapy education, and that the trainers can be in some way integrated into it as an education model. Okay, so thank you very much, and I hope that gives you a little bit of a background into what we did with the Train the Trainers and what we achieved from it. And the support of the agency was fundamental to it. It wouldn't have happened without Ed and Zubi fully behind it. So we thank them very much indeed for that.
Thank you very much, Mary. That's been a very important initiative, I believe, and it would be very useful to see how we can take all the lessons forward. And this goes to Michelle. How do you think we can further improve global collaboration in the RTT profession, Michelle? What are the opportunities and what exactly can we offer?
Thank you, Ben. So I hope to answer that by discussing the GREAT project a little bit more now. Just let me start the slideshow. So I already presented this slide to you earlier. So just to recap on what the GREAT project between Trinity College and the IAEA is all about. It's looking at countries where specific radiation therapy education for RTTs doesn't really exist or is very, very limited. And I've given you the reasons as to why we feel this is important already. So we can kind of focus on the equipment, then the equipment eventually arrives after much significant effort on everyone's part to get it there, and then it doesn't work out very well because no one has thought about who's staffing or the education of the level, the education level of the RTTs who are operating this equipment. So this is kind of where we want GREAT to come in, to recognise that this is an issue, to collaborate with you and to collaborate with your educational institutes on finding out, first of all, what are the barriers to preventing the implementation of a global curriculum, and working together then to develop specific RTT online educational interventions that will be useful for the educators on the ground in your country to basically raise the standard of RTT education, and also working with them to set up a specific and dedicated clinical practice education structure. So I suppose really what's important for me to say at the outset is what GREAT is not. And what GREAT is not this very, paternalistic view that people will fly in and suddenly teach everything. That's not, A, it's not appropriate, and B, it's also not sustainable. So what GREAT is looking at is equipping people, a little bit like an extension of Train the Trainers, as you've heard there from Mary, a little bit like an extension of that, of equipping and empowering the RTT educators, which also includes, remember, really clinical radiation therapists who have to have a very important role in teaching the skills of clinical radiation therapy. So empowering you to basically take a hold of the education of RTTs in your own country, or put a structure in place that is actually manageable and can move forward. And the reason why I think this is so important is that if we look to the figures that we have from the Global Task Force on cancer control, some of you may have read these papers in the last few years ago, and they make for sobering reading when it comes to the numbers of RTTs that will be needed to meet global demand for radiation therapy in the coming years. And I know that Zubi was instrumental in the modelling of these numbers for this project. And they range from about 8,000 in low-income countries all the way up to about 50,000 plus in high-income countries. So you can see there about 24,000 in lower middle-income countries and about 45,000 in upper middle-income countries. And 2035 is not that far away. So we need to be putting a lot of effort and concentrated effort into how we are going to manage that in the future and what is the capacity for educating these professionals. And this is why I suppose GREAT is a different way at looking at educating RTTs rather than the traditional way, which, has, I suppose, varying levels of success, but also the actual magnitude or the number of RTTs that can be educated in that way will be nowhere near what is actually needed in the future. So I see our time is running a little bit late, so I'll quickly go through what we propose are the work packages for GREAT. Okay, so the first is the scoping of the barriers to implementation of radiation therapy curricula globally. So I mentioned some that we're aware of earlier on in one of my presentations, but we need to hear from you as to what are the issues for you specifically and honestly in your country, in your department. The second one then is thinking about how are there any strategies that we can implement when we know what the barriers are to try and surmount them. It's not going to be possible, a little like Mary said about train the trainers, it's not going to be possible to surmount everything. And I mean, I think we have to be pragmatic and truthful about that. But I'm definitely convinced that there are some changes, even small changes, that can happen in every institute, in every country to try and improve the education of RTTs. And once we have done that, then we will have a look at, once we know what the barriers are to the current curriculum, then we will come to a consensus in different regions of the world, because obviously there, as we mentioned before, there are different political, cultural, society issues around the world. So in different regions of the world, to come to a consensus together on what are the key curricular components that need to be taught in that region. So say, for example, if you're working in a region of the world where you're working with cobalt units, which of course are very stable in regions of the world where electricity can be unstable, do you need to be taught about proton therapy, for example? I mean, that doesn't really make a lot of sense. So coming to a consensus together on what are the key curricular components for an RTT to work at their optimal level within that actual situation. And then the next work package will be developing that material. And of course, that's not insignificant. And then implementing it is obviously going to be the next stage. And that will include oversight of clinical placements to make sure that, because it's quite difficult to, without being on the ground in a certain country, to actually get a proper sense of what the situation is for clinical practice and what is possible, what is feasible. And then, of course, at the end, we have to evaluate as to whether this has actually worked or not. And if it has, excellent. And if it has not, what needs to be done differently the next time. So this is obviously an IAEA and Trinity College project, but it can't exist without your input, because it's so important that if we want to change things, that we all work together to do that. Everybody needs to collaborate with someone. You heard Nicola speaking earlier. Nicola collaborates with us in our institute because we don't have proton therapy. We don't have that expertise, and we need the expertise of Nicola for our program. So everyone needs to collaborate with others. As Uwe mentioned earlier, if we stay alone, we don't move forward. So the next steps in GREAT are that shortly, hopefully by the end of the summer, you will be receiving a survey that I hope that you'll participate in, and hopefully your colleagues will participate in as well, to identify what are the barriers in implementing RTT curricula in your country. And I hope that everyone will answer that very honestly, because if we don't have the honest, I suppose the real picture of what's happening, it's very difficult to move forward. So that will give us understanding, and then we can try and be solution focused, as we say, for all of the different situations. So I just say, for updates on GREAT, for those of you who use Twitter, that's my handle there, at Leach M Michelle, if you want to follow me for updates on GREAT. And also this is the Twitter handle of our institute, or our department, at TCD Radher. So Ben, I'll hand back to you, because I see time is running swiftly away from us.
Thank you, Michelle. Yes, we are running out of time, but it was very interesting discussion that we have had. And I would like to remind our attendees that in the Q&A panel, a great deal of questions and answers have been taken place. Please do check the panel, especially considering that we don't really have enough time for a live Q&A session for our webinar today. I think we can check whether there are unanswered questions. I noticed there was a question about fellowship. Zubi, you might be the most suitable person to answer this. There was a question about fellowships for RTTs and how people can apply for this.
The way The way to apply for a fellowship is the following. Your country needs to have an active project with the technical cooperation department of the IAEA. So the technical cooperation department has a liaison officer in the country, which is the National Liaison Officer, NLO. The NLO is usually in the Ministry of Industry or in the Ministry of Mining, but not in the Ministry of Health. So you need in your country to find out where the liaison officer with the agency is sitting and contact him, because he is the one that should know if there is an active project with the agency. Then we need to find out if there are fellowships planned within the project. If that is the case, okay, so then you can apply to one of those fellowships. But it's important that you also get in touch with us, because from this side we will be able to guide you perhaps and tell you who is the NLO and look for the projects. But also, even if there is not an active project now, think for the future and try to convince the authorities to submit a project in the future. So try to find the NLO on one hand and contact us on the other hand, I would say.
Okay, thank you very much, Zubi. I hope this answers the question. So we have seen a lot of interest in collaborating here. Two areas that have been mentioned were interest in collaborating in the train the trainers program for extension of it, and another one would be for grade. It's good to hear this, as Michelle has already described. The first step would be a scoping exercise, which all of our attendees today can definitely participate in and contribute. Is there any further questions? Okay, it seems to be enough. Yeah, thank you everyone for your support. We will be in contact with you shortly with the scoping exercise. So for now, I think we have come to the end of our webinar today. I would like to thank our experts for an insightful discussion. Now, to close our webinar, I would like to invite Zubi and Michelle again for closing remarks.
Well, I think that this is a very important milestone for us. Another one with Trinity College and our friends for the education of RTTs. And also for QA, I'm sure that we will begin to have other things that are not only education. And I'm very happy that we were able to organize this webinar. It's only the first one of many others that will come. And I'm very thankful with our experts that were here with us today. And I think that we have a long way to walk from there now on. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Zubi. So I'd just like to, I suppose, echo what you've said there, that I'm tremendously excited, I have to say, about the prospect of this project. And we've been working for so many years together already. And I really feel we're at a stage now where we can hopefully move up to the next level. And we've already achieved quite a lot in the Eastern European context. And now I suppose I'm looking forward to hopefully spreading that to different regions of the world as well. And I have to say, I'm very encouraged by the feedback and the comments that we've received today. And I see there's a lot of thumbs up flying around the place here on the screen at the moment. So I'm taking that as a positive sign, and that I'm looking forward to working with all of you, not just at the IAEA, but everyone who has joined today and your colleagues in improving the RTT profession. I think we have an amazing profession. Sometimes we don't realise that, and maybe sometimes we don't advocate for ourselves often enough. And I hope that together we can change that and make treatment better for our patients. So thank you very much, Ben.
Thank you very much, Michelle and Zubi. And with this, I would also like to thank our attendees today for sharing your questions and engaging in an insightful discussion on how we all can contribute to the advancement of the RTT profession. Special thanks to our experts again. Thank you very much. I know that you have sacrificed a lot of your time and effort to prepare the talks for today. So thank you everyone for attending this webinar, for your discussion, questions, and comments. We will try to follow up on questions we weren't able to discuss today. And stay posted for the upcoming webinars in the series. Thank you very much, everyone. Take care.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you, Ben. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Mary.